Europe has just dealt a heavy blow to Vladimir Putin. In Budapest, Viktor Orbán's defeat paved the way for a change that directly affects the war in Ukraine. It unlocks billions in funds, speeds up sanctions against Moscow, and weakens one of the most useful political bridges the Kremlin still maintained within the European Union. This Saturday, April 25, 2026, Hungary stopped being the major European brake used against Kyiv and became the point where the Russian strategy suffered a major setback. The European Union has formally approved a 90 billion euro loan to Ukraine and also the 20th package of sanctions against Russia. And the agreement came right after Hungary's new leadership lifted the veto that was blocking the measure. I'll tell you all about it in a moment, but right now, you'll want to subscribe to the channel to stay well informed, real-time information of the highest quality, the best journalism you've ever seen. Milson Alves News, the standard in credibility. The turnaround started at the polls. Peter Magyar, leader of the TISA party, defeated Viktor Orbán in the parliamentary elections on April 12, 2026. Orbán, who had been in power for 16 years, fell after an election marked by high voter turnout and growing rejection of his model of governance. Reuters reported that the TISA party won as a pro-EU force, while Orbán left office after years of friction with Brussels, accusations of weakening democracy, and closeness to Russia and China. The impact was not confined to Hungary's borders. Orbán's defeat directly affected Putin because the Hungarian Prime Minister was seen as the main internal obstacle to decisions favorable to Ukraine. For years, Budapest blocked the aid package, delayed sanctions, and used its veto power to force concessions. Now, with Magyar politically in charge, that mechanism loses strength, and when the Hungarian blockade loses strength, the European Union gains speed. The first sign came quickly. On April 23, 2026, the European Union formally approved a 90 billion euro loan to Ukraine and also the 20th package of sanctions against Russia. Reuters reported that the money should cover about two-thirds, which means the European Union has to Russia, package, Russia, European sanctions package with part aimed at the military sector and part intended for essential services. The agreement was reached after Hungary lifted its veto. Budapest in the Union to pay sanctions to Russia. Preventing it is crucial. Putin's war doesn't end in a day. But the structure that kept Moscow politically afloat within Europe led to a shock. Without Orbán as a reliable barrier, the European Union is able to release resources, approve sanctions, and discuss Ukrainian integration with less internal sabotage. The Council of the European Union stated that the 90 billion euro loan could start being dispersed as early as the second quarter of 2026. For Kyiv, this money comes at a critical moment. Ukraine needs to keep the state functioning, pay for basic services, support its defense, and expand its military production. The European package is not just ordinary financial aid, it shows that Brussels is taking more responsibility for the war. Just when Moscow was trying to bet on Western fatigue, Putin's calculation was simple. Wait for Europe to become divided, tired, and retreat. Orbán's fall showed the opposite. Hungary was small in military strength, but enormous in political value for Moscow. Orbán was not a threat. His influence was elsewhere, at the European Union negotiating tables. He could delay decisions, demand changes, threaten vetoes, and turn every support package for Ukraine into a slow dispute. For Putin, that was gold. Each delay meant time, each veto meant political erosion, every internal fight in Brussels served as Russian propaganda. Now that instrument has been shaken. Magyar does not appear as a leader willing to turn Hungary into a military base for direct support to Ukraine, but he represents something that already changes the game. A Hungary less submissive to the Kremlin and more interested in restoring ties with the European Union. The Associated Press reported that Magyar promised to restore democratic institutions, tackle corruption, and reverse Orbán's policies after winning a broad parliamentary majority, and then the blow hits even harder. Orbán built his power by exploiting fear, political control, and confrontation with Brussels. This stance pleased the Kremlin because it weakened European unity. When the government from within the bloc repeated arguments close to Russian interests, Moscow gained a platform. They could say that Europe was divided, that Ukraine was isolated, and that the sanctions had no future. With the Hungarian defeat, that showcase cracked. The Kremlin tried to downplay the loss, but Dmitry Peskov said that Moscow would not send congratulations to Magyar because Hungary is considered a hostile nation for supporting sanctions against Russia. The statement was reported by outlets like Anadolu and Meduza and showed a sharp change in tone compared to the previous relationship with Orbán. This statement by Peskov carries symbolic weight. While Orbán was in power, Moscow had a predictable political channel within the European Union. After the election, Hungary began to be treated as part of the same bloc as the nations that put pressure on Russia. The Kremlin may try to maintain a pragmatic dialogue with Magyar, but it no longer controls the pace. The piece that helped stall Europe has left the center of the board. The change also affects energy. For years, Orbán defended Hungary's dependence on Russian oil and gas, using this issue to justify resistance in Brussels. The recent dispute over the Druzhba pipeline was used as an argument to block the loan to Ukraine. When the oil flow was resumed and Budapest withdrew its objection, the European package moved forward. The Associated Press highlighted that the resumption of deliveries to Hungary and Slovakia helped resolve the deadlock. But the bigger point goes beyond the pipeline. Putin has always used energy as political leverage. If a European nation depended too much on Russian gas or oil, Moscow gained leverage. Orbán played along with it and even turned it into rhetoric against Brussels. With Magyar, this dependence may not disappear overnight, but political will changes. Hungary tends to negotiate with Russia without serving as a shield for Putin within the European Union. Orbán's defeat also affects the Russian narrative. Putin tried to sell the idea that the West was divided, that Europe was tired, and that leaders close to Moscow would rise within the bloc. The Hungarian election showed a tough response. Even after years of political control, pressure on the media, and fear-mongering, the electorate toppled a government seen as too close to the Kremlin. This has a psychological effect on other nations, pressured by Russian influence campaigns. Therefore, Putin loses on three levels. He loses a political ally within the European Union, loses a roadblock to funding and sanctions, and loses part of the narrative that Europe is doomed to division. For the Kremlin, which relies on time, fear, and attrition, this is a real blow. Russia still has weapons, soldiers, oil, propaganda, and allies, but it has lost a piece that operated from within the European system. Meanwhile, the European Union is turning Orbán's fall into practical action. The €90 billion loan has been approved. The 20th sanctions package has moved forward. The measures target financial sectors, energy, ships involved in irregular oil transport, and networks used to circumvent restrictions. The Council of the European Union stated that the goal is to put pressure on the Russian war economy and give Ukraine the means. The central fact is that Putin's war has entered a more difficult phase in the European political arena, because it lost one of its most important shortcuts within the European Union. Orbán's fall unlocked the money, made room for sanctions, and showed that Russian influence can be defeated at the polls. The blockade that protected Moscow within Europe suffered a major breach. For Kyiv, it's a relief. For Brussels, it's progress. For the Kremlin, it's a grim warning. Like this video, subscribe to the channel, and at the end, check out the comments so you can be even more engaged with the Milson Alves news community.